All right, listen up, because this one's wild. Joe Rogan once broke down the story of the Pharaoh who literally thought he could challenge God. Yeah, imagine having that level of ego. The dude had palaces, armies, and more gold than Mr. Beast could give away in 10 lifetimes, but in the end, he drowned like anybody else. And that's the lesson we're diving into today. Power, pride, and how the biggest empire can crumble with one wave. Buckle up, because these 4 points are about to hit harder than a Rogan punchline. Think about this for a second. Pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was the ultimate flexor of his time. He had pyramids built like skyscrapers before skyscrapers even existed. He had armies so loyal that one command from him could shift the entire region, and he had wealth. Gold, jewels, slaves, the works. But none of that was enough for him. Power made him drunk, and ego made him blind. He didn't just want to be respected, he wanted to be worshipped. Imagine standing in front of millions of people and declaring, "I am your supreme lord." That's not confidence, that's delusion on steroids. And yet people bought into it. They bowed, they obeyed, they cheered. Because when someone has enough power, people start confusing fear with respect. But here's the reality. No matter how much power you hold in your hands, you're still standing on ground that belongs to someone greater. That's the illusion of power. It tricks you into thinking you're untouchable. But power is like a borrowed car. You're driving it, you're speeding, windows down, music blasting, feeling like the king of the road. But the truth is, the keys don't belong to you. At any moment, the real owner can take it back. Pharaoh forgot that. He thought his throne was permanent, that his crown made him immortal. But history doesn't lie. Every throne eventually shakes. Every crown eventually falls. You can't take it with you when you go. Pharaoh had everything, but he couldn't buy a single breath when his time was up. Now here's where it gets interesting. We look at Pharaoh and we think, wow, what arrogance. How could anyone think they're above God? But if we're being real, don't we sometimes do a mini version of the same thing? We get a little promotion, suddenly we're walking around like we own the company. We stack a little cash, suddenly we forget who provided it in the first place. We get one viral post online, and suddenly we think the world revolves around us. We may not be declaring ourselves gods, but we sure act like it when our ego runs unchecked. That's why the story of Pharaoh is so relevant, not because it's just about some ancient tyrant, but because it's a mirror showing us what happens when pride and power go unchallenged. And the crazy part, power is temporary by design. It's like ice in the sun. It looks solid, it feels cold, but it melts faster than you realize. Pharaoh's empire looked eternal, but today his mummified body lies in a museum, a warning sign for anyone who thinks they're too high to fall. That's the punchline of history. The same man who once claimed divinity now sits in a glass case where tourists point and take selfies. Tell me that isn't the most poetic ending of arrogance you've ever seen. But let's flip it, because there's a motivational spark here too. If power can vanish, that means we shouldn't chase the illusion of controlling everything. Real strength doesn't come from holding power, it comes from knowing who holds it. You want confidence that never breaks, tie it to the Creator, not the crown. You want security that doesn't vanish, anchor it to faith, not fortune. Pharaoh built monuments to make his name last forever, but here we are thousands of years later, talking about his downfall instead of his greatness. That's the legacy of arrogance. It backfires, and I want you to imagine this in your own life. You might not have an empire, but maybe you've got influence. Maybe you've got talent. Maybe you've got people looking up to you. The question is, are you using that to lift yourself higher or to lift others with you? Pharaoh used his power to crush people. Moses used his faith to free people. One drowned, the other's story inspires millions. That's the fork in the road we all face when we get even a taste of power. What's wild is that arrogance always blinds you to reality. Pharaoh saw miracle after miracle, the staff turning into a serpent, the sea splitting. and still he refused to admit the truth. That's the danger of pride. It doesn't just make you fall, it makes you unable to see the cliff you're walking toward. And let's be real, life has a way of humbling everyone. No matter how much you think you're in control, one sickness, one accident, one twist in the economy, and suddenly all that illusion of power evaporates. You're back to square one, realizing you were never in charge to begin with. So the takeaway, don't wait until life humbles you. Humble yourself first. Recognize that whatever strength, influence, or blessings you have, it's not a throne, it's a trust. You're holding it for a while, but it's not yours forever. Use it wisely, because the same God who gave it can take it back in an instant. And when he does, the only thing that'll matter is not how high you climbed, but how grounded you stayed, because power isn't proof of greatness. Humility is. Here's where Pharaoh's story gets even more fascinating. He didn't build his empire alone. Nobody ever does. Behind every so-called powerful leader, there's always a crowd. Advisors, soldiers, entertainers, yes, men. The whole squad. And Pharaoh had mastered the art of using people's fear to fuel his image. He had magicians to wow the audience, ministers to echo his commands, and guards to silence anyone who questioned him. Think about it. Half his power didn't even come from himself, it came from the crowd agreeing with his delusion. That's the dangerous part. Sometimes it's not the tyrant alone who destroys, it's the silence of the people around him. And isn't that true even today? How often do we see wrong things happening, but everyone just goes along because it's easier to stay quiet than to stand alone. People clap when they don't agree. They nod when their heart says no. Why? Because standing against the crowd feels like standing against the world. Pharaoh didn't rise just because he claimed to be God. He rose because the people let him. They surrendered their own courage and let fear dictate their choices. That's the scary thing about crowds. They can make wrong look normal. Let's make it relatable. You've seen this in schools, at workplaces, even online. Someone bullies another kid and the rest laugh, not because they think it's funny, but because they don't want to be the target next. Someone at work takes credit for someone else's effort, and the whole office just shrugs because why rock the boat? Online, influencers can push nonsense, and their followers repost it, hype it, and call it wisdom, because nobody wants to be the odd one out. But truth doesn't change just because a million people agree with a lie, and courage doesn't come from following, it comes from standing when everyone else sits. That's exactly why the story of Moses versus Pharaoh is so powerful. Picture this, one man, a staff in his hand, no army behind him, standing in front of the most feared ruler on earth. Everyone's eyes are on him. The magicians are ready to humiliate him. The soldiers are ready to kill him. The crowd is ready to mock him. Yet Moses stood there, calm, firm, certain that truth doesn't need numbers to win, it just needs faith. And when his staff turned into a serpent, when the miracles started unfolding, even the magicians, the very men paid to deceive the crowd, saw the truth instantly. They fell into prostration and said, "We believe in the Lord of Moses and Aaron." Imagine the courage that took. They broke free from the crowd's hypnosis in front of Pharaoh himself. And what did Pharaoh do? He threatened them, tortured them, even killed some of them. But once you've tasted truth, you stop fearing tyrants. This is the lesson we've got to internalize. The crowd is powerful, yes. It can make you feel safe. It can make you feel accepted. It can even make you feel right. But the crowd is also fickle. The same people who cheer you today can boo you tomorrow. The same followers who praise you online can cancel you in a heartbeat. If your identity, your courage, your morals are tied to the crowd, then you're not really living. You're just surviving in other people's shadows. Real strength is being able to say, even if I stand alone, I stand with the truth. That's what Moses did. That's what the magicians did. And that's what Pharaoh couldn't handle, because nothing threatens a tyrant more than individuals who can't be controlled by fear. But here's the real talk: it's not easy. It's never been easy. Standing against the crowd feels like swimming upstream while everyone else floats downstream effortlessly. People will call you stubborn, weird, out of touch. They'll laugh, they'll gossip. Sometimes they'll even turn against you. But let me ask you, what's the point of blending into a crowd that's running straight off a cliff? Better to be the lone person who turns around than the 1,000 who march into destruction together. That's why the Quran reminds us again and again: most people will follow illusions, most people will chase the world, most people will mock the truth. So don't be surprised if the crowd doesn't support you. Truth has never been about numbers, it's always been about conviction. And here's something that might blow your mind. Pharaoh had millions of followers in his time, but today, who inspires us? Not him. It's Moses, the man who stood alone, the magicians, the ones who switched sides, the believers who risked everything to reject falsehood. We don't remember the crowd that stayed silent. We remember the few who dared to resist. That's a legacy, that's real influence, and that's a reminder for us that it's not about how many people you please, it's about who you please. Because if the entire world loves you but God is displeased, what have you really gained? But if the whole world turns on you and God is pleased, you've already won. So the choice is always there: be a voice or be an echo. Stand with truth or get lost in the noise of the crowd. Because history doesn't remember the ones who just blended in. It remembers the ones who had the courage to stand out. Now let's talk about control, because this is where Pharaoh's entire empire started to crack. On the surface, he had everything locked down. His word was law. If he said jump, whole nation asked how high. He had armies at his command, builders raising monuments in his honor, wealth that could buy loyalty, and fear that silenced dissent. To anyone looking from the outside, this man looked untouchable. But here's the truth about control: it's the biggest illusion of all. You think you've got it, but life always finds a way to remind you who's really in charge. Pharaoh learned this the hard way. He thought he could manipulate people, bend nations, even rewrite faith itself by declaring himself divine. But then came the signs, the plagues, the disasters, the moment when even his closest advisors couldn't explain what was happening. The Nile, his pride and joy, the lifeblood of Egypt, turned into blood before his eyes. Frogs invaded his palace, locusts devoured his crops, darkness swallowed the land. Imagine the panic in those moments. All the soldiers in the world couldn't fight off a swarm of locusts. All the wealth in his vaults couldn't buy sunlight when the skies went black. All the power he claimed vanished with a single command from the real king above. And yet, instead of humbling himself, Pharaoh doubled down. That's the thing about arrogance. It doesn't just blind you, it makes you deny the obvious. He saw miracle after miracle, each one shattering the illusion of control, but instead of admitting the truth, he clung to his false image. And doesn't that sound familiar? How often do we see people holding on to control when it's already slipping through their fingers? A boss who won't admit the company's failing, a leader who denies mistakes even when the whole world sees them, an influencer whose image is collapsing but still posts like nothing's wrong. It's human nature. We hate admitting we're not in charge, but that's the lesson. No matter how powerful you think you are, you're one breath, one heartbeat, one event away from realizing you control nothing. Here's where it hits home. Every single one of us tries to play Pharaoh in our own lives sometimes. We plan everything down to the last detail: our careers, our relationships, our future, and then something flips the script. A job you thought was secure vanishes overnight. A person you thought would stay forever walks away. An opportunity you counted on evaporates, and suddenly the illusion of control shatters, and you're left realizing that the pen has always been in God's hand, not yours. The Quran reminds us again and again, they plan, but Allah is the best of planners. Pharaoh thought his plan was unbeatable, but the plan of Allah dismantled him piece by piece. And here's the wild part. Sometimes losing control is actually the biggest blessing, because when you're forced to let go, you realize who was holding you up the whole time. Pharaoh saw it as weakness to admit he wasn't in charge, but that humility would have saved him. Instead, he clung to the lie until it drowned him, literally, and that's the danger. If you refuse to let go of control, life has a way of ripping it from your hands in the harshest way possible. Think about the contrast. Pharaoh had all the worldly power but couldn't control a river, couldn't control an insect, couldn't control the very breath in his lungs. Meanwhile, Moses had none of that. No throne, no army, no treasure, just faith, and yet when he raised his staff, seas split. That's the difference between illusion and reality. Control built on arrogance collapses. Control handed over to God moves mountains. Now let's bring it back to us. We live in a world obsessed with control. We want control over our time, our money, our image, even our destiny. We track everything, plan everything, manage everything, and then we wonder why anxiety eats us alive. Because deep down, we know we're holding on to something we can't actually hold. The more we try to control, the more fragile we feel. The moment life throws a curveball, we break. But when you accept that God is in control, something shifts. You stop panicking when plans change. You stop drowning when things go wrong. You start moving with trust instead of fear. That's the opposite of Pharaoh. That's the path of Moses. And don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean sit back and do nothing. You put in the work, you plan smart, you use the tools God gave you, but you never fall into the trap of thinking it's all you. You don't confuse effort with ownership, because when you realize your power is borrowed, you stop abusing it. You stop pretending to be the master, and you start acting like the servant you were always meant to be. Pharaoh thought control made him a god, but in the end, it revealed him as just another fragile human being. And that's the punchline of his story. The higher you think your control reaches, the faster life reminds you it was never yours to begin with, because the only one in control, the only one who never loses power is Allah. And when you live with that truth, you don't drown in fear. You walk on faith. And this brings us to the heart of Pharaoh's downfall, the thing that finished him. The thing that turns kings into cautionary tales, arrogance versus humility. You see, Pharaoh's ego was his real enemy, not Moses, not the plagues, not the Red Sea. It was his own refusal to bow, his own pride that told him, I am too big to fail. And that's exactly what made him fall the hardest. Picture this moment. The Red Sea parts, the Israelites cross safely, and Pharaoh, instead of stopping to think, instead of asking himself, wait a second, how is this happening? Could this be the hand of God? He charges in, chest out, crown gleaming, thinking he's still in control. And when the water's close, when the waves tower above him, when the reality of death slams into his lungs, that's when he finally cries out, I believe, but it was too late. Humility that comes when your empire's gone, when your breath is slipping, when your power is nothing. That's not humility, that's desperation, and desperation at the last second doesn't erase a lifetime of arrogance. Now here's the twist. The lesson isn't just about Pharaoh, it's about us. How many times do we wait until life breaks us to finally bow our heads? How many times do we ignore the signs until we're drowning in our own mistakes? We wait until the health scare to pray. We wait until the heartbreak to ask for guidance. We wait until the bank account empties to remember gratitude. It's human nature. We postpone humility as if tomorrow is guaranteed. But Pharaoh's story reminds us, you don't know if you'll have that tomorrow. Humility delayed can turn into humility denied. And let's get real. We live in a culture that worships the opposite of humility. Flex culture, show-off culture, social media telling you that your worth is in how loud you can shout, how much you can flaunt, how much you can make others envy you. But what's funny is, the people who scream the loudest for attention are usually the ones who feel the emptiest inside. That's the irony of arrogance. It looks powerful, but it's fragile. One blow and it crumbles. Humility, on the other hand, looks quiet, looks simple, but it's Unshakable, because when you bow your head before God, nothing in this world can make you bow to fear. That's why the prophets didn't strut with their power, they walked with their humility. The prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, conquered lands, led armies, inspired nations. But he mended his own clothes, ate simple food, and sat with the poor as if they were kings. That's real power, when you can have everything and still lower yourself. Compare that to Pharaoh, who had everything and demanded more. One is remembered for mercy, the other for tyranny, and the irony is, we know more about Pharaoh's fall than his victories. That's how history treats arrogance. It erases your greatness and leaves only your mistakes as your legacy. But here's where it gets practical for us. Humility isn't about putting yourself down. It's not weakness. It's not insecurity. It's not walking around saying, I'm nothing, I'm nobody. No, true humility is knowing exactly who you are and where your blessings come from. It's walking with confidence but giving credit where it belongs. It's saying, yes, I worked hard, but without God's will, I'd have nothing. That balance is what makes humility powerful, because when you're humble, success doesn't corrupt you, failure doesn't break you, and praise doesn't blind you. You stay grounded no matter what storm hits. Think about it like this. Arrogance is like building a house on sand. It might look solid at first, but one wave wipes it out. Humility is like building on rock. It might not look flashy, but it stands firm when the storms come. Pharaoh built on sand, and the sea swallowed him. Moses built on faith, and the sea opened for him. That's the difference, and every day we're building. Every choice we make, every way we treat others, every time we choose between flexing and serving, we're laying bricks. The question is, are we building a monument to ourselves that will crumble, or a legacy of humility that will last? And let's not sugarcoat it. Choosing humility is hard. Our ego hates it. Our pride resists it. We want to be seen, we want to be applauded, we want to be above. But humility doesn't mean disappearing. It means shining without blinding others. It means lifting people up as you climb. It means remembering that greatness isn't measured by how many bow to you, but how many you bow down to help. That's how you flip the script. That's how you avoid becoming a pharaoh in your own story. Because at the end of the day, Pharaoh drowned not because he was weak, but because he refused to be humble. And Moses walked free not because he was powerful, but because he submitted his power to God. That's the contrast we're left with. Two men, two choices, two legacies. One name remembered as a warning, the other as a source of hope. So the question is, when the waves rise in your life, which one will you be?